Hey, folks, Eric Stacklebeck here. Welcome to yet another Watchman Newscast live stream. We try to do this every Wednesday, sometimes on Thursdays, but today it is Wednesday, which is our usual day for these live streams. Now, we have already hundreds of people joining us. That number will grow to thousands from around the world. Literally every corner of the world, you will be joining us today for this live stream. And man, two very momentous Middle East visits over the past week. Number one, Joe Biden visited Israel and Saudi Arabia last week. And of course, our main topic of conversation today, Russian President Vladimir Putin was in Tehran yesterday, meeting with Iranian leaders and Turkish President Recep Erdogan, a trilateral meeting between Erdogan, Putin, and Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. And Putin also met with Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. So needless to say, we have a lot to talk about. Now, we usually go for a full hour. Today, I need to run at 4:45 p.m. Eastern, 15 minutes early, unfortunately, because I have to pop up on a TBN show, our show Centerpoint, where I will be talking about Russia and Iran in this Putin meeting. So we're wrapping a little bit early today. We usually go for a full hour here on the live stream. But don't worry, we're still going to get all the questions in. We'll go, let's see, probably around 4:30 Eastern. We will get to questions and we'll finish out with about 15 minutes of questions. We'll also hit on real quick our watch and pray verse of the week. And of course, we've got a lot of news to discuss. Just a quick shout out to everyone watching. I'm just kind of looking on the side of my laptop here and I see the chat scrolling down and people are hopping on from all around the country and all around the world. So a shout out to everyone watching. Hey, I assume if you're with us on the live stream that you are dedicated watchmen and women, loyal viewers of the show who are subscribers. But in case you have not subscribed, go ahead and click the subscribe button and click the notification bell as well so you can be updated every time we post a new video here. And that includes sometimes on the weekends. This past Sunday, we did a post about Iran coming clean, essentially, folks. A top Iranian official, Kamal Karazi, a senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, saying, hey, we have the capability to develop nuclear weapons if we so choose. We haven't made the decision yet, but if we want to, we can do it. And oh, by the way, he added, we can enrich uranium at a 90% clip at the drop of a hat. To me, that was very telling. Iran has played this semantic game over the past few decades saying, look, yes, we have a nuclear program, but it's only for peaceful civilian purposes. We don't want the bomb. And yet sometimes the veil is lifted and the facade slips. And that's exactly what we saw on Sunday. And I mention that because we have an update there. Those comments on Sunday obviously created a stir. Now Iran today, the Iranian government is kind of walking them back and saying, no, we still have a fatwa, which is an Islamic religious ruling from the supreme leader saying we are not to develop nuclear weapons. The fatwa has not been thrown out. And, those comments on Sunday, just kind of overlook that, forget about it. So they conveniently pulled out the fatwa card once they were pressed on their true intentions, which anyone with a shred of common sense watching knows is to develop the bomb. Unfortunately, we live in times when common sense is not so common, and that includes Western leaders who are still tripping over themselves to forge a brand new Iran nuclear deal. But we do want to today break down this Putin trip to Iran and what came out of it. Some pretty important developments. And Erdogan was there as well. Three major players that we talk about a lot: Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And for good reason. Obviously, prophetic implications there. The Ezekiel 38-39 invasion, or the invasion that those chapters outline, the Gog-Magog invasion. I believe that Russia, Turkey, and Iran are the three major players in that last days confederation that comes against Israel and meets its demise on the mountains of Israel, according to the word of God. So when these three are getting together, folks, for such a time as this, it's a big deal that we need to talk about. We talked about it on yesterday's newscast, but we're going to dig deeper a little bit today. And remember, send your questions along for our Q&A session. I see already people are sending questions, and that is great. Okay, Vladimir Putin pays a visit to Iran, only his second international trip since launching the invasion of Ukraine back in, February 2022 already. Hard to believe it's been that long. But yes, I was actually in Israel when that invasion launched on February 24th. Putin, again, only his second time leaving Russia since the invasion launched. And lo and behold, no surprise, he winds up in Tehran, where folks, literally, he received the red carpet treatment. He got off the airplane and a red carpet was rolled out that Putin walked down, and he went immediately to meetings with Khamenei, the supreme leader, and Ibrahim Raisi, the Iranian president. And I think pretty telling statements prior to his visit. A top Iranian official said, hey, look, Russia is our number one strategic partner in the world. Iran considers Russia its greatest ally strategically, economically, militarily in the world. And that's saying something. It's not a surprise, given the news we reported here in the newscast last week, that Iran is supplying hundreds of drones to Russia to be used on the battlefields of Ukraine by Russian forces. So, folks, I say all of that to say this alliance, and it is an alliance, between Russia and Iran is growing by the day, and Putin's visit only solidified that. Think about it. This is a man who has been a pariah on the world stage ever since February when he launched that invasion. Yet now Iran is welcoming him with open arms and embracing him. And also he's meeting with the leader of a NATO member nation, Recep Erdogan. This gives Putin the kind of legitimacy that he was seeking. He can say to the people back at home in Russia, hey, look, we're not completely isolated. We still have friends in the world. And by the way, Erdogan and his cozy embrace with Putin and with Iran is the reason, one reason, that I refer to Turkey under his leadership as NATO in name only. Turkey was a loyal Western ally, a friend of Israel for decades, dating back to the end of World War I, really, and the disbanding of the caliphate, a caliphate which Erdogan would like to reestablish once he came into power in 2002, 20 years ago. Turkey took a turn for the worse, took a turn to the east, away from the west, and into the arms of the likes of Iran. That's where Erdogan is building his alliances, his relationships today with Russia, the Middle East, and others of that ilk. And look, you know you're in prophetic times when these leaders are meeting. This was only the latest meeting between Russia, Iran, and Turkey. There's been several over the past few years. But these are three nations, folks, who were at each other's throats for centuries, who fought wars against each other. And now, at this moment in history, Russia, Turkey, and Iran are coming together. I do not believe in coincidences, and I don't think this is a coincidence, the sudden coming together of these three nations. Putin, his meeting with Iran, standard stuff, pledging their joint partnership in a variety of areas, economic, military, business. Clearly, they didn't say this out loud, but clearly helping each other to evade U.S. sanctions as well, also on the agenda. We'll get to Erdogan in a minute and his role in this. But I think perhaps the biggest news to come out of these meetings, at least on the Russia-Iran front, was that the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, during his meeting with Putin, defended Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He came out with a full-throated statement of support for Russia's war in Ukraine. He said that this is NATO's fault and NATO was going to start a war with Russia anyway, and that the West fears a strong and independent Russia. That's a big deal because Vladimir Putin obviously has been looking around the world for friends and supporters as he has become more isolated on the world stage in the wake of the Ukraine invasion. Clearly, he's been looking for that kind of full-throated support, and he got it from Iran. And folks, that's a big deal. Number one, he's not completely alone. Vladimir Putin, Russia, they're not alone. Anything but. I just did an entire special on this, a 1-hour special on TBN last week called The Gathering Storm Against America. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, all very close, folks. And this is an anti-Western alliance, a largely anti-Israel alliance. If some members say China isn't openly anti-Israel now and Russia isn't openly anti-Israel now, they one day will be, I believe. But Russia's not alone. India has also come to the rescue with Russia and maintains good relations with Russia. Belarus, of course, Venezuela, Cuba, nations like that. So as much as the West has tried to isolate Putin, he still flexes a lot of muscle on the world stage and influence. He showed that in Iran with this growing, again, anti-Western alliance he's forming with Iran, and also with Erdogan, who was there. Now, the main reason, by the way, for this trilateral meeting, folks, was ostensibly to talk Syria. All three, Russia, Iran, Turkey, are essentially carving up Syria right now. They all have a military presence in Syria at Israel's doorstep, I might add. But Erdogan was also there to lobby Putin over grain, Ukraine grain, you could say, and to lobby him to allow Black Sea ports in Ukraine to open up so Ukraine can send grain around the world. Ukraine also exports sunflower oil, corn, and obviously we have concerns over global food shortages and a global food crisis. So Erdogan is saying, look, we will use the Black Sea to help transit those exports out of Ukraine, but he needs Putin's okay to do it. And Putin said yesterday after the meeting with Erdogan, basically, we'll see. He was very non-committal. And he said, basically he's putting the ball in Ukraine's court. So he's got influence there still. Secondly, and I take no joy in saying that, I'm just giving it to you straight. This is, if back in February, March, you thought Putin would be completely isolated, Russia's entire economy would collapse, everything would collapse there, it hasn't happened. Not only so, he's flexing his muscle on the international stage, obviously, and with the grain situation, the food shortage situation, he's got a hand. He exercises influence there. Lastly, gas, grain and gas. Putin made comments to reporters yesterday after his meeting with Erdogan and Raisi, and he said, look, we'll see what happens, basically, I'm paraphrasing, with the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Now, remember, we didn't mention this on the newscast, but I'll take the opportunity to do so now. On July 11th, a little over a week ago, Russia shut down that Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which brings natural gas into Europe. As you know, Europe relies on Russia for some 40% of its energy. Well, Russia temporarily shut down that pipeline for annual maintenance, they say. It is supposed to open back up tomorrow, which is Thursday, July 21st already. That pipeline is supposed to maintenance. Any repairs are supposed to be finished by tomorrow. But the big question is, will Russia open the pipeline back up? Or will they cut? I know Europe has been concerned, European leaders, that he won't reopen it at all, and he'll cut natural gas in a severe way to Europe as revenge for Europe's opposition to the Ukraine war. In the very least, I'd be surprised if he just shut it all together yet. I think eventually he likely will. It's coming to that, it seems. And Europe, we've talked about it here in the newscast, is looking for alternative sources of energy. A little late in the game to do that. Maybe they should have done that, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, if not longer. Yet here they are, reliant on Putin, and Putin literally has Europe over a barrel. But he said to reporters yesterday in Tehran, look, when we do reopen the pipeline, it will be at a reduced capacity. So even though he's not going to cut it all the way, it seems yet, it's going to be reduced capacity. And Europe is sweating. They're getting nervous. Yes, We're in the middle of July right now. You have a massive record-breaking heat wave hitting Europe right now. You have heat across the United States as well. But Europe is concerned about energy. And it's July. Before you know it, it's going to be like November, December. Time flies, folks. And Europeans will want to use their heat, put their heaters on. And if there's no natural gas, it's going to be awfully tough to heat your home in Europe. So Europe right now is scrambling. There's been obviously an absolute and complete falling out between Europe and Russia over the Ukraine invasion. Now, the prophetic implications of this, we've talked about again, I just mentioned on the newscast, Europe has looked to Israel to replace at least some of that natural gas. Last month, Europe, Israel, and Egypt signed a trilateral agreement, whereas Israel will ship natural gas to Egypt and the gas will go on to Europe. So Israel will make up at least some of that lost natural gas that has kind of unfolded after the Russian invasion, but not all. I mean, Russia supplies a massive amount of gas to Europe, but Israel is working diligently to make that up and to cultivate more natural gas out of the Mediterranean. Off the coast of northern Israel, you have the Karish gas installation right now. We mentioned on the newscast on Monday that tensions between Hezbollah and Israel have been running high over Israel continuing to explore for more natural gas there in the Mediterranean. All of a sudden, Lebanon is saying, hey, wait, that's our territory. Those are our territorial waters. All of a sudden, once Israel started finding natural gas, it's funny how that works. Now there's a maritime dispute magically, and Hezbollah is now speaking into this and threatening Israel, saying, don't you dare continue your natural gas exploration. We'll get to that in a minute, but all of a sudden, look, Israel's northern border with Lebanon, not with Syria, of course, but with Lebanon, has been relatively quiet since the summer of 2006. No massive flare-ups since that 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, which Hezbollah instigated by kidnapping 2 Israeli soldiers along that border. It's been relatively quiet since then, but the buildup has continued on both sides, folks. Hezbollah at that time had maybe 12,000, I believe, rockets. Now they have over 150,000 rockets and missiles. Quite a buildup in the 16 years since that last major engagement with Israel. So could this maritime dispute, which Hezbollah is now getting involved in, could that be a trigger for that coming Great Northern War? I read a piece today, an analysis piece out of Israel, saying Israeli officials are concerned about September, something breaking out with Hezbollah. So we're keeping a very close eye on that right now, but a precarious time, to say the least. What do you think of Putin's visit, his meetings in Iran and Turkey? You can leave a comment. You can comment or ask a question. I think it's got big implications, folks, in a geopolitical sense. From a purely secular perspective, anyone would have to admit, when two of America, from an American perspective, and I know we have viewers from around the world, but let's just say when two major anti-Western players, Russia and Iran, are meeting and it's a warm embrace, you have to take notice. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, even if you don't believe the Bible, even if you've never heard of Bible prophecy, you're going to take notice. It's a big deal, and it is very newsworthy, to say the least. But if you blend in the prophetic factor, as we like to do here on the Watchman, then the implications are even larger. And I see this relationship between Russia and Iran continuing to grow. And although they do not agree with Turkey on everything, yesterday was interesting. Erdogan, in his photo op, his meeting with Putin, not sure if you guys saw this, he made Putin wait for about a minute. Putin had to wait. And then Erdogan showed up about a minute later. So Putin was standing there kind of awkwardly waiting for Erdogan's arrival. Now, this was kind of payback of sorts. I believe it was 2018 where Putin made Erdogan wait for, I think, 2 full minutes. So a little bit of gamesmanship there. Who's the alpha male? Those two are trying to prove, I guess, to each other. But Russia and Turkey certainly have not agreed on everything. They're on opposite sides in Syria and Lebanon, between Azerbaijan and Armenia as well. But they agree on more than they disagree on. Both sides are trying to keep solid relations, and I believe a day is coming. The Russia-Iran relationship, folks, that's only going to go stronger. Syria, which all three players discussed yesterday, is the main reason for that. But I believe Turkey will grow closer as well to these nations. And there will come a day, despite any disagreements they have, when they can all agree that Israel needs to be taught a lesson in their view. And they're going to come together, along with the Confederation of Nations, probably some of the former Soviet republics, some North African nations, and they are going to come against Israel as part of that war of Gog and Magog. Some of our commenters say, no, Russia will not be involved in that invasion. It's going to be Turkey that leads it. And that's okay. We can agree to disagree. It's not a salvation issue. But it seems to me the way things are lining up and the way, in my reading of Scripture personally, talks about a nation to the uttermost north of Israel. I don't think you can escape that when you look on a map, the nation to the uttermost north of Israel, a direct line north, is Russia. I don't think there's any escaping that. And that nation, according to the prophet Ezekiel, will lead that confederation against Israel. And if you look at how things are shaping up right now, does that seem like a stretch? Putin is, look, we say this on the newscast a lot. I'll repeat it now in case you haven't heard it. You can tell a lot about a man and a nation by the company they keep. Vladimir Putin's company includes Israel's greatest enemies, the Iranian regime, the Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas. These are the greatest enemies of the Jewish state. And these are good friends of Vladimir Putin. If you doubted that, look no further than his warm embrace yesterday in Tehran, Israel's greatest enemy. Not only that, he is perched, or his forces right now are perched on Israel's northern border in Syria. They're already a stone's throw from the mountains of Israel, as are Iran and Turkey, all in Syria. Coincidence? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I don't think so. And we've seen the unraveling of relations between Russia and Israel over the past several months. We have documented that for you in depth here on the Watchman Newscast. I've called it a great betrayal that's coming, because right now Israel, although Israel is very uncomfortable with what Russia's doing right now, especially in the Middle East, very uncomfortable with Russia's presence in Syria. Why do you think that Israel hasn't offered a more strong condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Because Israel, frankly, doesn't want to anger Russia, because Israel wants to maintain freedom of movement in Syria to be able to push Iran back. So a very delicate game, a delicate balancing act that Israel has struck. But even so, folks, there has still been a falling out on a lot of levels. Syria, number one. Russia completely excoriated Israel over its airstrike at Damascus International Airport last month, where Israel was targeting advanced Iranian weapons shipments. But that's the tip of the iceberg. It's loggerheads over Syria, where, by the way, you have to think that yesterday in Iran, Khamenei and Raisi were strongly lobbying Putin to basically crack down on Israel and to cut Israel's freedom of movement in Syria, to draw a line in the sand and say, Israel no more. Supposedly, the main crux of their conversation yesterday was Syria. You have to think that Iran was saying, you know, the real troublemaker in Syria? The Zionist entity. And Vladimir, what are you going to do about it? I thought we were friends. We're selling you hundreds of drones. We're supporting you publicly, supporting your invasion of Ukraine. What are you going to do for us? What have you done for us lately, Vladimir? How about this? How about you take our back against the Zionist entity and no longer allow Israel to operate freely in Syria? Is that a stretch to think that? Does that just sound crazy? I don't think so. I think it sounds completely plausible. And I think it's eventually going to happen. I think this so-called deconfliction mechanism, which Israel has shared with Russia over the past few years, whereas Israel operates freely in Syria, strikes Iran and Hezbollah, these Russian allies, under the noses of the Russian military, without Russia intervening. Russia has stood back. I don't think that's going to last forever, folks. And although Israel is concerned, gravely concerned about what Russia's doing in the world and in the region in its own backyard, I don't know that Israel yet, based on conversations with current and former Israeli officials, lawmakers, I don't know yet that they see the full devastating extent of how Russia will turn. I think Israel says, look, we're not getting along, but we're working hard to cultivate the relationship with Russia. And they're a rational actor. They won't completely turn against us. Folks, I would not be so sure of that. That's why I've called it the great betrayal. I think there's going to be some surprise on the part of Israel when Russia turns fiercely against Israel. And I'm not necessarily saying fiercely in the military realm at first. I think it's already been pretty fierce on the diplomatic realm. If you haven't heard of Maria Zakharova, check her out online. Some of her condemnations of Israel over the past few months. Check out some of Russia's condemnations of Israel at the United Nations. So already it's getting tense. And I think a day is coming. And what will precipitate that? A hard Russian turn against Israel. Perhaps something happens in Syria. Perhaps Russian troops or Russian military hardware gets in the line of fire inadvertently when Israel's conducting operations there against Iran. Perhaps the fulfillment of Isaiah 17, which says that the city of Damascus, the capital of Syria, will one day become a ruinous heap. Again, I take no joy in saying that. I'm just telling you what the word of God says. How would Russia react to that? To the fulfillment of Isaiah 17? How would Russia react to Israel striking Iran's nuclear facilities? We've taken a major step forward in that regard over the past week alone. Not only these Iranian comments on Sunday that I cited at the beginning of this live stream, and by the way, if you missed any of this, you can check it out here under Newscasts. We will post this as soon as I'm finished in about 17 minutes. But not only that, we had the meeting last week between Yair Lapid and Joe Biden in Israel, where Lapid said, and this, look, Lapid is the interim prime minister. He's heading up a caretaker government until elections on November 1st. Could he remain prime minister? Could he win the election on November 1st? It's possible. But right now, the favorite is certainly Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu to become prime minister once again on November 1st. In the meantime, Lapid, look, very liberal on social and cultural issues, looked at generally as a center-left kind of guy, ideologically. But some have said, look, on security, he'll be solid. And I will say, Israel has a broad ideological divide. Look no further than the last government, which just collapsed a few weeks ago, which precipitated Lapid's rise to interim prime minister. That government was made up of 8 different political factions with basically 8 different ideologies. They were all united in their opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu, of course. But I've made this point, folks, throughout, that even those on the center left like Lapid, when it comes to preventing Iran from acquiring the bomb, I believe they'll do it. I believe there's not much consensus among Israeli political figures, Israeli officials, over many things at all. But when it comes to stopping Iran, I believe even a Lapid, if he knew that Iran was at the doorstep, the bomb was coming, as liberal as he is on cultural, social issues and left-leaning, it's a survival issue. And you would think that he would act. We may see, and we may see soon. A lot can happen. November 1st, the next Israeli election, a lot can happen. 4 months, 3.5 months is an eternity in the Middle East, needless to say. And if Isaiah 17 unfolds. I'm not saying that's going to unfold in the next few months, but what could be really at the doorstep is an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear facilities in the next, who knows, several months, next year, next 2 years. 2 years is not a long time. 1 year is not a long time. But it seems that things are rapidly moving in that direction. And then you may really see where Russia stands. How will Russia react to that? Think about this. Again, Russia is right now, Russian forces, thousands of Russian troops, military hardware, they are in Syria right now. They're at Israel's northern border, a stone's throw away. When, not if, when Israel starts exchanging heavy blows with Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria, and if Israel, and that might just be perhaps a when, if Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, will Russia just stand by and do nothing? Again, these are Russia's close allies. Russia is aligned shoulder to shoulder with them in Syria at Israel's doorstep. I'm not saying Russia is going to intervene militarily directly in the Great Northern War that we've talked about, which is coming. But they are going to make their displeasure felt mightily, folks. This is an embarrassment by extension for Russia. If its allies take a whooping, which I think they will in this coming Great Northern War, Russia has egg on its face as well. Your friends just got their tails kicked. I think in that next engagement, Israel is going to decisively defeat Hezbollah. I mean decisively, whereas Hezbollah does not threaten Israel in a meaningful way, a major way like it does now after this next war. None of this is going to sit well with Russia. These are Putin's friends. By the way, a thought to leave you with before we move on to questions. Maybe Putin's not the guy to lead the Ezekiel invasion. He's 70 years old. There have been persistent rumors about his health, cancer treatments. Maybe there's someone after Putin who takes the helm. We don't know. But we're going to find out eventually. And the prophetic chess pieces are moving on the board. Now, I'm going to save Watch and Pray until next week. Psalm 91, one of my favorites. We're going to unpack that. But I'm running short. As I said, I have to run at 4:45 Eastern. Don't go anywhere. We got 12 minutes of questions here. But I have to hop onto another TV program in a few minutes. I want to mention as well, before we get to questions, this will take me 30 seconds, don't worry, the premium member Q&A. Thursday, August 4th. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a date. Premium members, Thursday, August 4th. We will debut a premium member Q&A. Now, premium membership here on the channel, pretty simple. Just go to the homepage and you'll see join and click join. $4.99 a month. Number one, you help keep us on the air, which is always nice. We appreciate the help, folks, truly. It's a blessing. But secondly, you get some nice perks here on the channel. For our Watchmen, women on the wall who are with us every day, we wanted to offer something a little bit extra. So we give you the exclusive first look at every brand new episode of The Watchman Show every Thursday, which is cool. Before anyone else in the world, you're seeing it, which is kind of nice. And also some exclusive behind-the-scenes commentary from yours truly. But we're adding new elements to premium membership, and the premium Q&A is a big step for us. By the way, I got a few angry comments saying, how dare you offer a premium membership? Relax. If you're not a premium member, we still love you and we appreciate you. You can still watch all of the Watchmen content that a premium member can see, except, again, the premium Q&A and other little perks. But we still love you. It's nothing personal. We just want to offer a little something more for our loyal viewers, which is a nice thing to do. It's nothing personal. There was some anger in some of the comments. God bless you. We love you guys too. So Thursday, August 4th, mark your calendars. We're going to do the premium Q&A for strictly premium members. So if you don't get your questions answered usually here, because you get a lot of questions in here, then you will indeed get them answered on Thursday, August 4th. That's going to be fun. Kind of an intimate thing with our premium members. Again, if you haven't become a premium member, check that out on the homepage. Just click join, and you can join us on August 4th for that premium Q&A. In the meantime, I've got 10 minutes for Q&A right now. So let's shoot. What do you have? Let's see here. I'm going to pull up some questions. I know they're being sent along. Give me 1 second, folks, as I pull it up. Here we go. Okay, let's see what we have. I knew the questions were coming in at a rapid clip. Need 1 second for this to load. I apologize. And here we have it. Okay. Let's see. We've got a question from Brazil. Ricardo Di Martino. Greetings from Brazil, brother. Hey, greetings, Ricardo. Ricardo, before I read your question, I have a question for you. What do you think about the upcoming Brazilian election? Will Bolsonaro hang on? Will the left-wing Marxist ex-con Lula become Brazil's president once again? I'd like to know. But here is Ricardo's question from Brazil. In your opinion, why does the USA not appear to defend Israel in the book of Ezekiel, in that Gog-Magog war? Does something happen, in your opinion? God bless. God bless you too, Ricardo. Great question. A lot of people have asked. I think it's actually pretty simple. I think at the time of that Gog-Magog invasion, we could very well have an administration here in the United States, where I'm sitting right now, that is not pro-Israel, that is not trustworthy when it comes to Israel, that is not a friend, a true friend of Israel when the rubber hits the road. An administration which has been reluctant to get involved, to support allies in general, which has projected weakness on the world stage. Sounds familiar, right? If you're watching how things are unfolding here in the States right now. I'm not saying it's going to be this administration, but there will be, I believe, at the time of the Gog-Magog invasion, weak leadership in the United States, and perhaps the U.S. And as a patriotic American who loves this nation dearly, we're having a lot of problems internally, folks, right now. This nation has never been more divided. I'm giving it to you straight right now as someone who lives here. There's a clear divide, and Jesus said a house divided against itself cannot stand. And my grave concern for our nation is that we're destroying this nation from within. It's very troublesome time for a nation that has served as a leader of the free world. And if we are so divided internally and beset and preoccupied by internal problems and strife, it's going to be really hard, I believe, to project strength in the Middle East or around the world when Russia and this coalition is forming and on Israel's doorstep, and the Ezekiel war is coming. And Ezekiel 38, 39, pretty clear. Many people believe that the merchants of Tarshish and the young lions thereof refer to Great Britain and the United States in particular. The book of Ezekiel says they protest loudly, and they say to Russia and this Gog-Magog coalition, why are you doing this? But the Bible is pretty clear that no one lifts a finger to help Israel. Sheba and Dedan are also mentioned in that coalition. Opposing that coalition verbally. Why have you done this? But the Bible is pretty clear at that moment when this invasion commences that Israel is on its own to face these invading hordes. Not exactly on its own, because guess what? Israel has the greatest friend you could ever imagine, folks, and that is the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He will intervene in the affairs of men in a very public way, in a very powerful way, intervene in a way publicly that he hasn't for the whole world to see in some 2,000 years. And again, that coalition that comes against Israel will meet its demise on the mountains of Israel. Bank on it. When all looks like it's lost, God Almighty will step up and protect his land and protect his people. That day is coming. I'm not a date setter, nothing like that, but I could have said that day is coming 500 years ago. It's in the Bible, and it's yet to come. So there you have it. But I don't believe the U.S. will step up in any meaningful way. Hey, someone asked, will the member stream, the Q&A, premium member Q&A, be at the same time and hour on Thursday, August 4th? Yes, we'll go at 4 p.m. Eastern time. More details to come. We've got about 15 days, I guess, but I will continue to kind of promote that and remind you guys in the next 2 weeks before we launch that. Let's see, some more questions here. Some more questions. Do you think, this is a good one, Alan Neeson, do you think Turkey will backstab NATO? I think in a sense you could say it already has. I mean, as far back as 2003, Erdogan did not let the U.S. use Turkish airspace or Turkish territory for the invasion of Iraq. You may have disagreed with that invasion in 2003. Whatever your take on it is, pretty telling that a NATO member nation denied the U.S. access to its territory. So this has really been an unraveling of about 20 years. And we saw, obviously, Erdogan kick up a lot of dust a few weeks ago and make noise about preventing Finland and Sweden from joining NATO. I think the proof is in the pudding, as they say. He is openly embracing, in the form of Hamas, a terrorist organization. He has welcomed Hamas with open arms on Turkish soil. He's been viciously against Israel, a NATO ally. Now he's mounting this charm offensive. And because his economy is in a tailspin, inflation through the roof in Turkey, and he's on this charm offensive, it won't last. So I think the ultimate backstab would be Turkey just leaving NATO. I don't know that he'll do that in the short term, folks. I don't even know, to be honest with you, I'm not an expert on the intricacies of NATO and what it would take to leave the alliance. But you would think that right now, Erdogan loves being in that alliance in a sense, in that although he disagrees with them on practically everything, he's almost like a mole, a plant inside of NATO. Do you think he doesn't like having a presence amongst Western nations and privy to the conversations and privy to the meetings with the West? He loves that. This is a guy who has regional and global ambitions, and although he probably can't stand Europe in general, he'll continue to be a part of that NATO alliance because, again, he's getting inside access to nations he considers to be his enemies. He'll stick around as long as he can until it becomes absolutely untenable. Would Europe eventually give him the boot? Hey, tough to say. Turkey has, I believe, is it the largest or second largest military force in all of NATO? I'm not sure Europe wants to make an avowed enemy of Erdogan, but I think in the long term it will be unavoidable. And that will be a loggerheads type situation, if that makes sense. Good question there. We've got time for one more quick one. Very quick, because we have to wrap up. Randy Parker asked, do you think Israel will take out the nuclear threat in Iran and possibly take Damascus out at the same time? That's tough to say, Randy. It depends on what happens vis-a-vis Damascus. If Israel takes out that Iran nuclear threat and Bashar al-Assad, Iran's good pal, responds by raining ballistic missiles, God forbid, chemical, biological weapons onto Israel, yeah, you could see Damascus have a very rough day as laid out in Isaiah 17. I think a bigger question could be, does Israel take out the nuclear threat in Iran and the Hezbollah threat in southern Lebanon simultaneously? Interesting. That's an understatement. We live in perilous times, but Bible times, some fascinating things unfolding. If you are a follower of Jesus, you're in good shape right now because you're not living in fear. You have a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind, like we were told to do by the Apostle Paul. So hang in there. I'm sorry I had to cut it short today, folks. We'll be back with you on a live stream next week. And of course, tomorrow right here for our regular newscast. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.